Good evening, everybody. Last time when we met, we concluded our lectures. We were looking at Pauline style of evangelism. We mentioned a number of things as we were discussing Paul's style of evangelism. We isolated several factors which included factors which influenced the success of Paul's evangelism. So far, we isolated 5 factors which we concluded can be attributed to the success of Paul's evangelism, namely the availability of the local church at Antioch, which provided Paul with several benefits and success drivers, namely a rich resource for the necessary piety and theology that was required for mission, which was drawn from a rich deposit of the Jesus traditions at Antioch. We also looked at the church at Antioch as a rich resource for a pool of well-seasoned group of co-workers in the ministry. Antioch also provided Paul with a report-back system to which Paul was accountable in his missionary activities, as well as providing a rich support base, both spiritually and materially. You will discover that we left out 2 other factors which we intended to discuss later when we compare and contrast the Pauline style of evangelism with that of Jesus. These factors are the market or open-air evangelism and the establishment of satellite congregations, which Paul actually thrived on. Now, as we start our discussions on styles of evangelism in the New Testament with Paul, we argued that we are starting with Paul because Paul is the earliest literary evidence in the New Testament and not Jesus. Therefore, what we wanted to get was a picture of the earliest record of evangelism in the New Testament. The record we have in the Gospels about Jesus' evangelism is secondary to Paul's. It is perhaps a much more polished view of evangelism which we may need to analyze with lenses of reduction critics. Nonetheless, we still need that record in the Gospels as it remains the only primary record on Jesus' style of evangelism. So, we are saying here Paul was or is the earliest literary evidence in the New Testament, and therefore the record about evangelism that we have in Paul is the most primitive record, the earliest record about evangelism in the New Testament. What we see as the record of Jesus' style of evangelism in the Gospels is secondary to Paul, in which case that knowledge that record about evangelism in the Gospels is a much more polished record, which we need to look at using our lenses of reduction criticism. Now, from this, from this analysis, we will look at Jesus, how Jesus began his ministry, and what we will also do next would be to compare and contrast Jesus' style of evangelism with that of Paul, to see if we have some points of intersection. And we'll also be doing this from the point of view of both source, form, and reduction criticism. Now, when we look at the Gospels, we see that Jesus began his ministry with his baptism and a long period of praying and fasting in the wilderness. According to the Gospels that record Jesus' fasting period, praying and fasting period in the wilderness, he did so for 40 days. Thus, like Paul, his evangelism began from the standpoint of some kind of piety and worship. This is evidenced also through his reply to John the Baptist in the Gospel according to Matthew. We see that as John the Baptist was about to forbid Jesus not to be baptized by him, but him baptizing John, Jesus' reply according to the Gospel according to Matthew was, "Do so in order that we fulfill all righteousness." So we discover that Jesus' evangelism is beginning from the point of view or from within the context of worship. It is based upon some kind of piety on the part of Jesus. The temptation narratives also provide us with the opportunity to see the rich deposit of knowledge about God that Jesus had and what God, the one who sent him, expected from Jesus himself. We will take opportunity to analyze the temptation narratives that we are provided with in the Gospels at a later stage. But the point to note at this point in time is that from the temptation narratives, especially in his dialogue with the devil or with Satan, we actually get to understand that Jesus had a deep knowledge about God. He had a deep knowledge about the one who sent him and what the one who sent him expected of him. From this, we learn that in order to engage in evangelism, we need to know who it is who is sending us. This is our starting point. There is need to know who it is that is sending us and what the one who is sending us expects of us. So the person of the one who is sending us and the expectations of the one who is sending us are critical. We need to know in full what those two aspects actually entail in our evangelism as we are about to engage in evangelism. This is necessary so that as we evangelize, we remember to always keep the main thing the main thing. From the temptation, the second major thing that Jesus did was to appoint the 12, whom he designated as the apostles. So we have a point of comparison here with Paul. Although Paul did not, or although there is no record of Paul appointing disciples around him, we get to know from both his authentic letters and from the book of Acts that Paul had a group of co-workers that he worked with. He is on record, he is always acknowledging these co-workers in his authentic letters. If you read the letter to the Romans, you'll actually discover that at the end, he has a list of co-workers that he is acknowledging. And you read Philippians as well, he has a list of co-workers that he is greeting and that he is also commending to the congregations that he founded to take care of. So we find that Jesus appointed the 12, whom he designated as apostles, and later on in both Luke and Matthew, we actually discover that the people he was working with actually numbered more than 12. In Luke, we actually learn that he surrounded himself with a huge number of disciples, which according to Luke numbered up to 70 or 72. So two factors that are actually intersecting between Paul's style of evangelism and that of Jesus. Number one, both evangelism enterprise, both of their evangelism enterprises are beginning from the context of worship and from a particular standpoint of piety. Number two, both had a deep knowledge and a broad knowledge of the one who sent them and what the expectations were. And number three, their evangelism enterprises were not that of loners. They did not evangelize alone. They, as with Paul surrounded himself with a group of co-workers, and Jesus appointed the 12, who later grew in number to about 72. So he surrounded himself with a group of disciples with whom he evangelized the society of his time. We'll end here, and I would urge you to take note of the three factors that were part and parcel of Jesus' style of evangelism, which I'm saying stand in comparison with Paul's style of evangelism and the success factors that we outlined when we discussed Paul's style of evangelism. And I would want to give you some piece of homework to look at the role of Jesus' baptism, the role of Jesus' temptation, and the calling of the 12 in the success of Jesus' evangelism. And when we pick it up from there next time, we will also look